I'm Catherine Kingsley.
And I'm Catherine Stern.
And this is
Contemplating Culture,
a missionary walk through a secular age. Together we journey through A Secular Age by Charles Taylor, a book looking at the history and philosophy of how the world got where it is, and the impacts of our contemporary culture for us today as missionaries.
And we're inviting you to join the conversation.
So welcome back to another episode of Contemplating Culture.
Hello, everyone.
So we are on the journey at the moment of looking at the rise of Disciplinary Society. So in our last episode, we're looking at the rise of polite society. And today we're kind of looking at, well, what is one of the things that was kind of underpinning that gave it some movement forward. So what was happening in the human person, I guess, as this is happening. And that's the glorification of reason. So our main character today is someone that I'd never heard of before I read A Secular Age. His name is Justus Lipsius, and he's in 1547. And Charles Taylor presents this as a very important point in time because he kind of talks about it as a zig that's then followed by a zag that ends us in exclusive humanism away from needing God in our daily life and being able to exist without the concept of God. So humanism is living without God, and exclusive humanism is actually we don't need God in the picture at all kind of thing. Like we can survive without that. So Lipsius is still from a Christian perspective, but he unintentionally, and it's more, I think, like the people that are reading him, 50, 100 years later that are breaking open his ideas and thoughts that are then able to take that and apply it to something which can in time become deism followed by humanism followed by exclusive humanism. So it didn't have to happen this way. I think that's one of the things Taylor would say. It's not like he caused this thing, but just the different people that picked up his works and read them at different points in time and the things that were already happening in their life of reform or things like that. Yeah, it's just one of the things that happens. So this is a kind of beginning point for us moving away. So last time we talked about the 5 programs, the poor laws, the popular culture crackdown, shaping for improvement, government structures, modes of discipline, those things that were kind of put into practice. So from what I understand, a lot of the key people that were behind some of these things, like certain bishops or certain government officials, people like that were getting the writings of Lipsius into their hands. And they're like, this gives us a practical philosophy for what we're trying to do here. Or having read this, I now understand, the reforms that are going on and I want to kind of join the work. So it's all intertwined and it's all happening. So Lipsius is 50 years before Descartes, and we'll get to Descartes, but he's a starting point for them, what Descartes able to pick up 50 years later and look at the glorification of reason. So Lipsius is one of the so if you're not aware of what the Stoics are, that's kind of like that Greek era of philosophy that is obviously where we get the word Stoic from today, right? That the goal is to be not apathetic, but almost like in a passionless wisdom. Like I have it all together and I don't need to express anything. Like that's the ultimate goal.
It's like you're sort of unmoved by things, like things happen and instead of bursting into tears or getting super angry, I'm able to kind of take them in and then respond in a reasoned kind of way without getting pushed around by emotion. That's the sort of...
Yeah, that's it. The sense of constancy is kind of one of the words there. If whatever's happening outside, within, I'm able to keep something secure. So Lipsius is one of the kind of first Christian neo-Stoics. So taking this stuff that had happened, like a few thousand years earlier in thought and bringing it and applying it to the new context. And so he's bringing in that sense of reason again into the philosophy of the time. But there's some key differences, I guess, between Christianity and Stoicism, because in the Stoic, effectively, they were working with this idea of form, which means that there is a perfect cat that has been created already, and you are already in that form, and your job in your life is to become what you already are by essence, that kind of idea. So things already have their meaning and their purpose, and your job is just kind of like uncovering that through your life, through your efforts. On the other hand, Christianity would say that you're incapable of reaching that place without the grace of God, that because of the impact of the fall and of sin, there's something in the way that your powers of reason and will alone cannot get you to where your fullest humanity is. So that's the first point of difference. And the second point of difference is something around the Christian idea of love, and agape love in particular. Because as we talked about, the Stoic sense is very much like I'm unmoved, and agape is very much about I'm deeply moved. Not that they're incompatible, but I think it's definitely one of the things that the early church we know struggled with, that we've got a Jesus who is so moved, so human, so full of passion, that they almost couldn't reconcile the humanity of Jesus with the Stoic inspired sense of a apathetic God, of a Stoic kind of deity. So we see these two kind of differences, and not that Lipsius is trying to do anything especially with them, but it's just worth, I think, noting that there's these kind of tensions in thought, and he's, I guess, holding both of them, and we'll see that over time things are going to start moving more along the Stoic line, that reason's going to be taken out, and almost like willpower can get us there. We look at the period of reform of this, couple of 100 years, and there's an insane belief that they can do this, that by discipline, by power, by reason, by human agency alone, they can achieve total reform of society. Like it's almost unprecedented, this kind of reform. And it comes from this belief that is very Stoic inspired of, by reason alone, we can get there.
Which is not too, or maybe we're not by reason alone anymore, but definitely we still think that if I do enough, if I will it enough, I can get there. I think that comes to stay.
It does. I remember a couple of years ago when the flights went missing in the ocean, and just this like bafflement that was like, wait, there's something that the human society can't do. Like, the planet's not that big. We can't find these planes. Like it's that kind of sense, that like if we combine the best of what we have as humanity, we can do anything.
Absolutely. And even, I don't know about you in primary school, but that sort of mindset that who knows what the world's going to be like when we're grown up, because, we're just progressing so fast as a human race that anything could be possible.
And so one of the things that kind of comes as a result of this line of work. So Lipsius is working with the things that we've been talking about, the removal of personal crime in favor of state war. This idea that limitless reform is possible, that we can keep reforming society, and that is built on stable vocation and mutual respect, industrious growth, self-improvement, that if we're improving the individual and the society and the structures that they live in, exactly, who knows what's going to be possible with us coming forward. And so that's very much a constructivist outlook of we can take what's here and we can make something that's not yet here.
You know what strikes me listening to you about all of this is that in my limited experience of like looking rationally at a world and going, this is the most efficient and logical way to get the best outcome in something, is that every time I kind of go through that process, another part of my mind reminds me that I also have this experience that I'm not reckoning on the individual opinions and desires of the individual people that I'm assuming are going to move in the direction that I want to move. And that although in one way, like what I'm thinking of is rational and reasonable and, there's this whole willpower thing, actually I'm not taking into account the actual will of the individuals that I want to move with my will. So there's still a necessity here of somebody whose will is in authority over and telling other people what they will, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Something that is very interesting, right, is if you apply this, say, to the difference between this and now is, say, we look at, I don't know, like young guy in their 20s, say something like that. If they're not working towards buying a house, doing the stable life, stable vocation, industrious living kind of thing, we almost now have an ethic of freedom of like, they should be free to do that, but that doesn't seem reasonable, right? So we now have something that they didn't have. So if you want to get a contrast, it's that kind of thing of like looking at everyone like you were saying, almost like a uniformity around the human person, right? Of like, this is the ingredients, this is the thing that's going to make you a good human person. And there was just an expectation that people would step into that because that was what was good for them and good for the state. So out of this comes this stance of poiesis. I had to look the word up, Poiesis, but I'm glad I did because it means bringing about something that wasn't there before. And that's very much the mentality of this era. And the logic goes something like this. God is ultimately sovereign, which means God has to always, at every point in time, be able to manipulate or change things however he wants. So there's actually a movement away from that earlier idea of form, of things being set in their purpose. We've kind of talked about this in the last few weeks as well. And now, well, God's got to have infinite control to manipulate. But this is now transferred to, obviously, the human person. If we're made in the image of God, well, God gave us reason, and God gave us, like his own image in us. So we must now be able to use reason, as God uses reason, to manipulate and control things infinitely. So you get this transference of everything that we were saying about God being able to move things at any point in time, decide what things mean, has now transferred down to the human person. So you can see almost like this is the zig that at some point, not inevitably, but in historical terms, happened, that we then got a zag away of, or suddenly we didn't need the reason to come from God. We could just take reason on its own. So one of the things that unintentionally happened as a result of this as well is, well, what is the human project, and what is the relationship between humanity and God in this period? And so, like Descartes, like I said, 50 years after Lipsius, and he's kind of talking about, well, order's not found but imposed. So this work of reforming, this work of we're doing the work to make things happen. And this is applied primarily to the human person. So my job is to be an excellent human person. And this doesn't need to be separated from God at this point because, as I was saying, reason has come from God. So God's given us reason, and I'm using that reason to become an excellent person. The question is, then, what's the role of worship in this space? And Charles Taylor says that worship almost becomes able to be irrelevant or unnecessary. My job is to become an excellent person, and I can almost say, thanks God for the reason that helped me achieve that goal. So I was wondering if we could spend a bit of time just breaking open that idea of worship, of what it means as we have it now. And like, do we have a God that gives us reason and sits at a distance and is, really happy for us and cheering on the sidelines when we do complete that goal of becoming an excellent human person? Or is there more to our relationship with God than that? Is there more to worship? And in this movement, like, is there something that's lost that we can reclaim today?
Well, I think there's already been a few things that are lost if you've got a God at that sort of distance already. Because the reality is that we have this two kind of, I'm going to use the wrong language here. I don't want to say two parts to God, two realities that we associate with God. Okay, there's that transcendent, amazing, awesome God who creates the world. And, like, I look in awe and wonder at God who does miracles and that kind of thing. And that God seems distant. But the God that we worship is also immanent. And it's a both and, like that personal person who is also, worthy of worship, who is a part of my life and whose miracles touch me. It's not just a historical thing that happened in the past. I can't see any of that in this picture of the world. I can't see any conception of that. And I've been sitting here listening to you thinking, actually, I think that's what, like, Ignatius Loyola, for instance, was trying to bring people back in touch with in the spiritual exercises. I think some of that, what you're talking about, is the work of the Counter-Reformation, which is going on at this time. But obviously it's the Counter-Reformation in itself is not big enough to redirect world history.
Mm-hmm.
But let's go back to your original question.
Yeah, worship. Like, you know, is being an excellent person enough? Charles Taylor talks about, like, out of this period of time is kind of where emerges the Protestant work ethic of, you know, like, my job is to be a stable citizen, to be in a stable vocation, to be a respectful, industrious person, to be doing the right things. But yeah, I mean, we're still in the period where your job was to attend and listen to a mass, right? Like, there's that kind of distance of you didn't have to engage in the worship so much as, I don't know, like, it was, do you know what I mean? There's like a separation. There's a part of the intimacy with God that seems to be lacking here.
Yeah, yeah. Which makes a whole lot of sense of the spiritual exercises, doesn't it? That into this kind of world you get, like, God inspires Ignatius Loyola to teach people to read the scriptures and use their imagination and put themselves into the stories and interact with Jesus personally, to experience the weight of their sins, to really engage with the reality of the passion, the reality of the resurrection, so that it touches their lives and transforms their lives in a lasting kind of way. But I'm still wandering away from what is worship, hey? I was thinking about the whole Protestant work ethic idea of being an excellent person and trying to put that into like a relational kind of thing. And I was thinking, well, it's still got this very distant idea of God. It's that deistic idea of the clockmaker who, you know, winds it all up and sets it going. It's a bit like, well, the kind of worship was sort of equivalent to, you go to all this effort to make me a game for Christmas.
Mm-hmm.
And my thanks to you is to take that game and play it with my friends.
Oh, I'd be so grateful.
Yeah, like, it's not like you wouldn't get some enjoyment out of me.
I would. I'd
taking
really
that game and enjoying it with my friends. But how much more cool,
mm-hmm.
how much more grateful, how much more relational would it be if I thanked you and kept acknowledging you as the maker of the game, if I
mm-hmm.
invited you to play the game with me and my friends, if I... Do you get what I mean? If I then allow that experience of being gifted by you in that to inform my knowledge of you as generous and to really honour you as a generous person, and not just a generous person, but a really creative, smart person who, like, all these things give me some knowledge of who you are, and I can proclaim you to be that and know you as that.
Mm-hmm.
And a gift usually is an invitation into some kind of relationship. What if I gave you a gift back?
Mm-hmm.
What if I, you know, talked to you about my life? Do you know what I mean? Just in a human relational way, the receiving of a gift and walking away with it to use it is sort of the bare minimum.
It really gets into something around, like, what is our image of God? Because even on that level, we're putting God on the level of human, you know.
Yeah.
But I think there's another step beyond that as well, where even if God didn't give us the gift of reason, there's still worship due him. And it's something like, I guess we talk about it as like the justice of worshipping God, which you could argue from a reason perspective, definitely. But we have this thing that's happening at the same time. So we talked before, very early on, about the buffered self, where as we disenchanted the world outside, we didn't need to be affected by it. So we've got like a barrier between us and outside, you know, that I can decide what's going to affect me and what's not. But there's this movement now of, as we're glorifying reason, that we become super buffered. We become buffered from ourselves. So it's like, I don't know, my little visual for this, like, little helmet around from the outside, but also like a little tube kind of separating or filtering between our head and our heart. The kind of sense that in this period of time, they're pursuing that constancy so that I'm not affected by what's outside, but I'm also not affected by what's within, that whatever my emotions are, I can still pursue with perfect reason the thing that's going to make me an excellent person. And I think that this also answers something of what's lost in worship, because God didn't give us emotions to separate us from them. And that I think Jesus is a really good example of this, that he is whole body, whole emotion in everything that he does.
It's true. And I think when you look at him and his relationship with the Father, what he reveals is not this kind of even like worship with God because you owe it to him in this reasons, justice thing, but he teaches us to pray our Father. That there's this whole relational thing that employs both the emotions and this idea of a God outside who, Father, like it really, that relationship should affect who I am and how I am. So if you're like the super buffered self blocks out both of those things, the other and the kind of inner responsiveness.
Yeah, there's something around like the sense of personal identity and connection in worship as well. It's that kind of thing that you're talking about. Like, we're not removed from the scenario worshipping something, but we're really in it. We really have an identity and a purpose in worship that we can only really access when we're whole body, whole mind, wholeheartedly in it. We can't just come to it with our head. We can't just come to it with our body, but it's that relational thing which you can't access separated from your heart.
I mean, I guess Vatican II sums it up nicely when they talk about a full, conscious and active participation in the liturgy. That, full implies all of me, like my head and my heart, doesn't it? My memory, my understanding, my entire will, all of who I am, conscious, active. There's a whole person involved here. And I think just like we're not made to be robots. Not meant to be robots just, achieving some purpose, which I'm still going with at this point in statecraft. That's what they want. They're trying to shape, unless you're at the top of the elite, you're a robot. You're having your life shaped by somebody
Robots don't
else.
exist yet, Kat.
well, they're doing a pretty good job of trying to make them. There's this whole paternalistic society that tells me who I am and what's good for me and where I sit in society and what I can do.
Yeah.
And like even this idea of worship of a God who, essentially tells me what I can and can't do. You can understand why we've still got left over in the world and the church today, this idea of what it means to be a Christian is you go to church on Sundays and you obey the 10 Commandments. None of this stuff about a personal relationship with Jesus, with a God who loves me and forgives me and all that sort of thing. It's all about going to heaven when you die and avoiding hell rather than this, why wouldn't I want to be with God forever?
And you've hit on something that is really at the heart of why I wanted to start this podcast, because I think that the image that you have of who God is, the image that you have of who you are, the image that you have of the state of the church and the world as it is, will really affect how you evangelize. And I think that there's things like this, like what you're talking about, that are still echoing in us. We're reacting to them without being aware that that's what we're reacting to. I think I was talking last episode about the reaction to, say, like maybe you've seen your parents that have been brought into faith either out of fear or ambition, and you're like, ugh, repulsive, because we're all about freedom in this day and age, right? And I think it's really important for us to just look at ourselves and examine, like who is the God? Who am I in God? What is the goal of evangelization, especially for us as missionaries, to be able to know what it is that we're working towards so that we can do it well.
True. I'm on a completely different tangent. I'm wondering about, this is like a whole, you've talked about a zig and a zag and you take God out of it, but I think there's been another zig And no matter how much I can reason you into faith, or I think I can reason you into faith, which is something else that seems to be a hangover, I reckon, in the church. Like, I could be as good as I can be at apologetics.
To make a perfect argument.
All the arguments in the world, but I cannot argue you into faith. That is our, current situation, that where the will is no longer glorified, but somewhere in our heads we still think it is. But emotion and experience rule.
It's true. It's very true. The amount of, arguments that are happening in the world that people think are happening from a rational perspective, but that are being driven. And that's what I mean. I think a lot of, my goal for these conversations is just to rise into the consciousness. Not saying that one thing's bad and the other thing's good, but just become aware of what we're acting out of, what we're operating out of, so that, I don't know, there can be a bit more honesty about what it is that's happening, and we can at least have something more realistic to be checking back to see how we're doing in the work that we're doing as missionaries.
Absolutely. And I think this sort of stuff, we need somebody about as rigorous or as thorough as Ignatius Loyola, actually, sometimes, to look through our evangelistic ideas. Because, we do talk on one hand about our world, listening more to witnesses than to teachers. And we know in one part of our brains that it's all about emotion and how I feel right now and experience. And yet we've got this hangover, and a lot of what we do to prepare ourselves, or how we might prepare an outreach or something like that, is speaking to reason. And the two don't connect in our brain, that we're not we're not reaching into where people are actually at. So it's, I think, good to open up the conversation, but good at some point to rigorously look at what we're doing and how that fits with.
So what I'm hearing, Kat, is that there's a big opening for a new generation of saints to rigorously look at how we're doing evangelization and applying it to the modern context. I'm all about that.
Absolutely.
Well, with that, I was wondering, if you're talking about the Our Father, if we could return to that simple prayer given to us as a form of prayer and of worship, and if you could just lead us in it in a way that we can enter in whole and fully and active in that whole sense of being in relationship, in worship of God, and connecting our own identity into the worship.
Wow, that's an awesome ask. I will lead the Our Father, and the Holy Spirit and you can do the rest.
Sounds good.
Okay. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come. Your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil.
Amen.
Amen.
Well, there is a lot in today, and I'm probably going to be unpacking it mentally over the next few weeks, months, years. But yeah, thanks, Kat, for the conversation. And yeah, I'm looking forward to the saints that are going to emerge out of taking this stuff on board.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
This has been Contemplating Culture, a podcast produced by the missionaries of God's Love Sisters. For more information from today's episode, be sure to check out the show notes. We pray that today has blessed you, and most importantly, we invite you to continue the conversation.